Hi folks, this is Klaus at Top Hydraulics. We're going to talk today about the hydraulic system in the Mercedes CLK, the first generation CLK that was made from 98 through 2002, where you manually unlock the front and then the rest of the convertible top actuates hydraulically. The video will be in a number of chapters. We'll go into lots of details, and so you can fast forward from one chapter to the next one. We'll talk about how the system works in general, why it failed, and then we will get into the guts of how to remove and replace all the hydraulic components, and also how to manually operate the top if you in an emergency have to open or close it. Hope you enjoy it. So let's talk about how this hydraulic system for the convertible top works, and in the end we'll also talk about the rollover bar a little bit. We have in the trunk a hydraulic pump that has a bunch of hoses going to the different cylinders throughout the system. Let's get the terminology clear. This is a pump. It has an electric motor on it and a reservoir with hydraulic fluid in it. We have the rear bow lock with a rear bow lock cylinder. This is the part that locks down the rear portion of the soft top, the portion with the window in it, and that's called the rear bow, thus the rear bow lock here. We have the tonneau cover lift cylinder, also called case cover lift cylinder. Tonneau cover, case cover, storage cover is all the same thing. So this cylinder lifts the storage cover up. We have the case cover lock, which has this kind of cylinder, the case cover lock cylinder in it. And we have 4 more cylinders for the operation of the top. That is the left and right main lift cylinder, sometimes also called top drive cylinder. And we have the rear bow lift or bow tension cylinders that lift the rear section of the soft top, the rear bow. Also, if we pan forward a little bit, we're going to show you here the other part of the hydraulic system that is for the hydraulic rollover bar with emergency release. If your car should get into an accident, or let's say the computer in your car senses that you're about to get into an accident, then there is an electric solenoid on this roll bar cylinder that simply releases the roll bar from the hydraulic system and lets it pop up under spring action. But normally you can raise and lower the roll bar slowly with the roll bar button in your console, and that is done through this roll bar lift cylinder, and this cylinder is controlled through the rollover bar valve block. There's also 2 so-called lock pawl cylinders that lock and unlock the holding mechanism for the rollover bar system, so it stays either extended or lowered. So let's go back to the main convertible top system, because that typically is the first thing to fail. Every modern convertible will eventually have leaks in the hydraulic system. It is the nature of the beast. The more fancy your car, the more parts can fail. I'm not the first one to say that there is planned obsolescence in here, that some of the seals in these cylinders could have and should have been made better to last longer, but that's beyond the point. Your car is now about 20 years old, and it needs this work done sooner or later. The first cylinders to fail typically are the rear bow lock cylinder and the case cover lock cylinder. Sometimes evidence of the rear bow lock cylinder leaking is fluid dripping onto the trunk lid out of the case cover, such as in this car right now. And how does this happen? Well, the seals in these cylinders are made of polyurethane. They decay with time. The decay of these seals is accelerated by heat. So if you're in a hot climate, your seals will fail faster than in a cool climate. but ultimately once a car is 20 years old, these seals will fail anyway, no matter how well you took care of your car. Top Hydraulics rebuilds and upgrades these cylinders. It's not a matter of replacing an O-ring. There are people who are saying you can put O-rings in these cylinders. That is, excuse me, bunk. It is a very temporary fix. Actually, there are a number of seals in these cylinders that all will fail with time, and they have to be replaced with a proper material. So what kind of seals are in there? We have the rod seal. That is typically what fails first. It seals the sliding shaft of the cylinder from the cylinder housing. We have a gland seal. That is the only actual O-ring in the system, and it typically is the last one to fail. We have a piston seal that divides the two chambers of the cylinder. Piston seals do fail, and when they fail, they wreak havoc. And we have port seals. That's where the hoses go in. So Top Hydraulics also replaces and upgrades the port seals where the hoses go in, because they will sooner or later fail. So what can fail on the pump? Well, actually, unfortunately, one of the things that makes these pumps fail prematurely is if the relay in this system gets stuck. The relay gets stuck if it has arcing on the contacts, and it can happen that after you close or open your top, you can hear the pump continue running. That means the relay may have spot welded itself shut such that it keeps the motor running. If that happens, unless you run and pull the fuse, the 40 amp fuse for this pump, eventually the motor will overheat and burn out. Fortunately, we know how to fix this. We do rewind our motors. We make them much better than new. We use 50% more copper than original, and with thicker wire and more windings on the armature of this motor, we actually make this motor use. If you should find your roll bar in the up position and it was not an emergency deployment, it just kind of ratcheted up after you drove over a bump and you're not able to retract the roll bar hydraulically, then you very likely have a bad roll bar valve. But we'll get into more detail about that later, and we'll go back to the convertible top hydraulic system and talk about that. So we have 7 cylinders in this convertible top system with the one pump. The pumps have changed starting with model year 2001. They have only 5 solenoids. Earlier pumps have 7 solenoids. The hydraulic cylinders each have a number of different seals that can and will fail. And as I said earlier, any modern convertible will eventually have the seals in the hydraulic cylinders failing. I'm not the first one to say that it is planned obsolescence, with the manufacturers putting in seals that are not as good as they could be. Well, Top Hydraulics fixes that, and we offer core exchange, where we send parts from our inventory first, then you send back your old ones to get back your core deposit, or you can send in your cylinders first, then we rebuild them, upgrade them, and ship them back to you. So what goes wrong in these cylinders? I'm going to hold one of this rear bow lock cylinder here in front of me and show you what seals are in there. We have the rod seal that seals the moving shaft from the housing. This is typically the first one to fail. It's made of polyurethane, which simply decays with time, and it decays faster in a hot climate. As you've learned in chemistry, most chemical reactions are accelerated by heat. It also decays faster if you have contaminants in your fluid or if you have water in your hydraulic fluid. But this is not the only thing. And by the way, replacing this seal with an O-ring is a very bad idea. O-rings are not made for this application. They will simply try to twist and turn while the shaft is sliding through them, and they will not last very long at all. Plus you risk damaging this cylinder if you try to open it up. Having said that, there are more seals in these cylinders that have to be replaced. There's the piston seal that separates the two chambers of the cylinder. Piston seals, when they fail or wreak havoc, they will plug up parts of your pump and also can slow down the rest of the system without you knowing what it really is, and your mechanic will likely say it's the pump while it actually was a piston seal. Lastly, there is the gland seal that just is a stationary seal. That's an O-ring that actually rarely ever fails. And I was wrong, not lastly. Now lastly, there are the two port seals. That's where the hydraulic hoses go in. These port seals will go bad with time, and there's no way you can fix this yourself. The port seals are behind bushings that need to be pulled with precise tools and put back into place correctly. And port seals are not O-rings. They are special edge-activated seals that Top Hydraulics molds out of Viton, which basically has an unlimited shelf life. Having said all of this, let's talk about the pump next. What can go wrong on the pump? Well, there are several components to it. There are, as I said earlier, the solenoids, the electric motor, and of course the pump mechanism itself. The pump mechanism can wear out with time if there was a lot of sludge in the hydraulic fluid. Sludge develops simply from decaying seals in the rest of the system, mostly, or slight abrasions from the cylinder walls. Once your fluid gets really dark, you know you have sludge in there. That is a little rough on the pump if you use the top a lot. Obviously there are seals inside the pump that, for example, separate the motor from the pump assembly or the reservoir. Of course, Top Hydraulics upgrades those, and we go through every single one of these solenoids, which can get plugged or burn out or simply malfunction. And lastly, the electric motor is somewhat common to fail in 208 pumps. It tends to overheat. Top Hydraulics remedies that by rewinding the armature of bad motors. We use actually 50% more copper than the OEM did in the pump by using thicker wire and more windings. Doing this, we have less current going through the pump for the same power, and the motor produces way less heat and should far outlast the car. Lastly, there are the hoses connecting the pump to the cylinders. Mercedes does not supply the hoses for the CLK anymore. Top Hydraulics makes new hoses with an improved design and excellent material. Those hoses are better than the original hoses. However, you don't normally have to worry about the hoses going bad. They are originally made to last, unless something odd happened, like there was a lot of tension on some hose because somebody worked on the car, or there are a couple of weak spots in the design where the hoses flex around a spot, especially the hoses going to the rear bow lock, failing fairly easily, and we see more and more hoses failing going to the tonneau cover lift cylinder. But it is not typically something that you need to worry about on a preventative maintenance. If you want to be smart, do preventative maintenance on your CLK. Simply have Top Hydraulics rebuild all 7 cylinders at the same time. That way you avoid getting the sludge in the system, and you avoid emergency situations where the top didn't move anymore because you lost fluid. And it's smart to do this ahead of time, plan it well so you don't have an emergency situation, and you can try to do the work yourself instead of paying big bucks because you suddenly need to get this done really fast. So let's go into the detail of removing the cylinders from the car.